Keith Brown, to be followed by Maggie Chapman. Mr Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We've heard some interesting and informed contributions. First of all, Murdo Fraser from his experience as somebody that's legally qualified, from Fergus Ewing, both as somebody legally qualified and has been a practitioner in this area in the past, and from Colin Beattie with his financial expertise. But I was going to concentrate a little more on the general situation which has given rise to the need for this bill, in my view, and some of the general points which underlie the general principles which is the subject of a Stage 1 debate. We are currently living through two major crises that are absolutely dominating the quality of life in our country, and that's the cost of living crisis, including something we don't talk about so much anymore, the cost of energy crisis, and the mental health crisis, two problems which are made worse by each other. The COVID-19 pandemic, also Russia's invasion of Ukraine, has helped unleash economic uncertainty across the world, and this is particularly true in Scotland, where the additional uncertainty and the massive costs of Brexit have wreaked even more havoc on the economy, impacting businesses, employment and individuals across the country. And these factors have contributed to producing a cost of living crisis that is pushing many Scottish households into financial destitution. For some, unsustainable debt has become a very unfortunate consequence of this, and we all know the strain, as we've heard, that can place on a person's mental health. And Scotland is in the midst of a rapidly worsening debt crisis, with a report published by Step Change, Scotland's debt charity, showing a 27% increase in average unsecured debt levels in just 1 year, rising from £12,730 in 2021 to £16,174 in 2022. For that reason, Presiding Officer, this bill could not be more timely, given its central aim of alleviating, in a small way, the struggles of grappling with debt and potential bankruptcy, two challenges often compounded by mental health issues. It's worth mentioning, however, that the changes to debt enforcement rules in the bill are not hugely dramatic or, as we've heard, particularly contentious, but pragmatic, and all the measures in this bill have undergone public consultation at least once and have received broad support. They would require transparency from entities like banks or employers regarding unsuccessful attempts to arrest a debtor's assets, while also ensuring the debtors themselves are entitled to a debt advice and information package ahead of relevant hearings, among other changes. And they are fairly straightforward changes, ensuring greater transparency for all involved. There was an interesting question raised by Stephen Kerr in relation to Colin Beattie's comment about a register. And, of course, unless any of the lawyers present want to correct me, I think it's the case that bankruptcy is always public and transparent, whereas this would be a public register which would also include references to people's mental health. So I would kind of share that concern. I'd be interested to see how the government manages to reconcile the issue between the impact on individuals of having their mental health situation made public and the need for transparency. Scotland has always had distinct laws from the rest of the UK regarding debt recovery, and I believe that this bill signals the beginning of a more compassionate and humanistic approach to debt recovery in the country, one which protects the dignity of our fellow Scots when they are at their most vulnerable. This is further shown by the mental health moratorium, which the bill proposes, which would provide individuals with serious mental health issues regarding legal protection and a freeze on debt enforcement actions, one of the most important actions that can be taken to try and alleviate the stress and the impact on someone's mental health, a shield to protect their citizens when they're potentially at their most vulnerable. I do take on board the points made by a number of members about the need for more specificity, and I do not envy the Minister's task in trying to get something which is objective and which might satisfy some of the concerns already expressed. But that specific tool, recommended by the working group in the development of the bill, recognises a strong link between problem debt and poor mental health. The Royal College of Psychiatrists reports that half of adults with debts face mental health issues, as we've heard, while 1 in 4 individuals with mental health problems is in debt. So there is clearly a symbiotic relationship between debt and poor mental health. And as lawmakers, we need to make laws that reflect that. The bill's significance lies in that commitment to improving our existing system to protect the most vulnerable at a time when it's truly needed. It's also important to remember that this bill is under consideration today and it represents only one aspect of a broader programme dedicated to improving how we deal with bankruptcy and diligence. And it's my understanding, again, as we've heard, that the Scottish Government intends to introduce additional changes through secondary legislation, a perfectly proper, legitimate and transparent process, which is subject to democratic scrutiny, with some secondary legislation expected to be laid before Parliament during the course of this bill's progression. And further to this, I understand the Scottish Government has undertaken a longer-term review to assess the adequacy of current statutory solutions in the increasingly challenging time in which we live, so we can continue to ensure that we are providing the necessary protection and support to guide individuals out of the throes of problem debt. There's been some discussion as to whether we simply mirror what happens in England and Wales in many of the important respects. I think there are important ways in which debt collection, in particular in Scotland, is much more humane and has developed over time, and I do not think we should throw that baby out with the bathwater, nor do I think it's a good course of action to denigrate this Parliament and simply say, let's do what's done by another Parliament. I have confidence in both the Government and the Parliament's ability to legislate properly in this area. So, to conclude, Presiding Officer, let our decisions on this bill reflect our commitment to improve the current system along compassionate lines. It is a different world that we live in now from which we lived in very recently in terms of the prevalence of mental health, many of the instances of which are due to the pandemic. And let's also build an effective legal framework. And as I said earlier, the changes in the legislation have already received broad support from the public, so let's make sure it receives broad support from this Parliament as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Brown. I now